The Black Hawk was taking fire from 3 directions when Ella Gray made the decision. Her 8-person Marine Force Recon team was trapped on that helicopter, circling a hot landing zone in the Philippine jungle where insurgents had ambushed a humanitarian convoy. The pilot was screaming they couldn't land. Too much ground fire, too exposed. Ella looked at the jungle canopy 40 feet below, at her M4 rifle, at her team waiting for orders. Then she unplugged her headset, grabbed the fast rope that hadn't been deployed, kicked it out the door, and dropped into hell. By the time her boots hit ground, she was already firing. Ella Gray was 28 years old and had been a Marine Force reconnaissance operator for 5 years when her team deployed to Mindanao, the southernmost major island in the Philippines, a place where dense jungle met crystalline beaches and where various insurgent groups had been operating for decades in the remote interior regions. The mission was officially described as Foreign Internal Defense and Humanitarian Assistance, helping Philippine military forces secure remote areas and protect civilian populations from insurgent violence. In practice, it meant small teams of U.S. Special Operations Forces working alongside Filipino troops, conducting patrols through some of the most difficult terrain in Southeast Asia, and responding to emergencies when civilians or friendly forces came under attack. Mindanao was beautiful and deadly. Volcanic mountains covered in triple canopy jungle rose from the interior. Rivers cut through deep gorges. Villages clung to hillsides, connected by dirt roads that turned to mud during the frequent tropical storms. The insurgent groups, a mix of separatists, criminals, and extremist organizations, knew every trail, every village, every hiding spot in thousands of square kilometers of wilderness. Ella's Force Recon team, callsign Phantom 26, consisted of 8 Marines, each cross-trained in multiple specialties. Ella was the team leader and primary point woman, responsible for navigation and leading movement through hostile terrain. Her weapon was an M4 carbine that she'd customized with red dot optic, vertical foregrip, and a sling configuration that allowed rapid transitions between shooting positions. Her team included Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, Assistant Team Leader and Breacher, Sergeant David Torres, Communications, Corporal James Mitchell, Automatic Weapons with M249 SAW, Corporal Sarah Williams, Medic, Lance Corporal Ryan Foster, Marksman with M110 Sniper Rifle, Lance Corporal Marcus Webb, Grenadier with M203, and Lance Corporal Eric Castillo, Engineer and Demolitions. They'd been in country for 6 weeks, conducting presence patrols and training exercises with Philippine forces. The deployment had been relatively quiet, lots of patrolling through difficult terrain, occasional contact with local villagers, but no significant combat operations. That changed on a humid Tuesday morning when the humanitarian convoy was ambushed. The convoy had been simple: 2 trucks carrying medical supplies and food to a remote village that had been cut off by recent flooding. The convoy was escorted by Philippine Army soldiers and was traveling on a dirt road through dense jungle about 30 kilometers from the nearest military outpost. The ambush had been professionally executed. The insurgents had placed an improvised explosive device on the road, disabled the lead vehicle, then opened fire from concealed positions on both sides. The Philippine soldiers had taken casualties immediately. The convoy was pinned down, unable to move forward or retreat, taking sustained fire from multiple positions. The distress call had come through at 0847 hours, while Ella's team was conducting equipment maintenance at their forward operating base. The voice on the radio had been urgent, speaking Tagalog mixed with English. "Under attack. Multiple casualties. Need immediate assistance." Within 3 minutes, Phantom 26 had grabbed their gear and sprinted to the helicopter landing zone, where 2 Blackhawks were spinning up. The quick reaction force protocol was simple. When friendly forces were under attack, the nearest U.S. Special Operations team responded immediately with whatever air assets were available. Ella's 8-person team had loaded into the first Black Hawk. A second Philippine Special Forces team had loaded into the second helicopter. The mission brief had been conducted over radio during the flight. Convoy ambushed, estimated 15 to 20 insurgents, Philippine soldiers pinned down and taking casualties, civilian aid workers potentially in danger. The flight had taken 18 minutes. the helicopters racing low over jungle canopy, pilots navigating by GPS coordinates transmitted from the ambush site. As they'd approached the area, everyone had heard it, the distant crackle of automatic weapons fire, sustained and intense. The pilot's voice had come over the intercom. "LZ is hot." I'm seeing muzzle flashes from multiple positions around the convoy. Ella had moved to the helicopter's open door, looking down at the situation. The dirt road was barely visible through gaps in the jungle canopy. 2 trucks were stopped on the road, one of them burning. Small figures, the Philippine soldiers, were taking cover behind the vehicles, returning fire at insurgent positions in the surrounding jungle. "I can't land," the pilot had shouted over the intercom. "Too much ground fire. They're shooting at us from 3 different positions." As if to emphasize his point, rounds had started impacting the helicopter's fuselage, sharp metallic pings as bullets struck armor. The door gunner had returned fire with his M240 machine gun, raking the jungle below. "We need an alternate LZ," the pilot had continued. "I'm looking for a clearing at least 200 meters from contact." But Ella had seen the problem immediately. The nearest clearing big enough for helicopter landing was at least 800 meters from the ambush site. By the time her team landed there and fought their way through dense jungle to the convoy, the Philippine soldiers might all be dead. She'd looked at her team, all of them ready to move, all of them understanding the same tactical problem. Then she'd looked down at the jungle canopy 40 feet below the hovering helicopter. The decision had taken about 2 seconds. "Chen!" she'd shouted to her assistant team leader over the helicopter noise. "Fast rope!" Now. Chen's eyes had widened in understanding. The helicopter wasn't equipped for fast roping. They hadn't expected to need it. But there was emergency rope stored in a compartment. If they could deploy it quickly, the team could rope directly down through the canopy into the combat zone. "That's insane!" the pilot had shouted over the intercom. "The canopy's too thick. You can't see what you're roping into." "We don't have time for alternate LZ," Ella had shouted back. "Philippine soldiers are dying down there right now. We're going in." Chen had already been pulling the rope from the storage compartment, 60 feet of thick braided line designed for exactly this purpose. He'd secured one end to the helicopter's hard point and kicked the coiled rope out the open door. The rope had dropped through the air and disappeared into the jungle canopy below. They couldn't see where it ended, couldn't see if it reached the ground or was tangled in branches. But there was no time for reconnaissance. Ella had unplugged her helicopter headset, gripped the rope with gloved hands, wrapped her legs around it, and without hesitation, dropped out of the Black Hawk into the jungle canopy 40 feet below. The descent had been terrifying. She'd dropped through layers of leaves and branches, the thick vegetation obscuring everything, the rope burning through her gloves even as she controlled her descent speed. Branches had whipped her face and body armor. She'd had no idea what was below her, solid ground, or a 20-foot drop to unseen terrain. Then her boots had hit ground, actual solid ground, not a branch or a drop. She'd immediately released the rope, brought her M4 up to ready position, and scanned her immediate surroundings. She was on the jungle floor, in thick undergrowth about 50 meters from the ambushed convoy. She could hear the sustained gunfire, clearly now. AK-47s from multiple positions, M16 from the Philippine soldiers returning fire, the wounded screaming. Above her, the second team member was already descending the rope, then the third. Her team was coming down one by one, fast roping through the canopy into an active combat zone without knowing exactly where they'd land. It was insane. It was also working. Within 90 seconds, all 8 members of Phantom 2-6 were on the ground, spread out in defensive positions, weapons ready. The Black Hawk had immediately pulled away, the pilot getting his aircraft out of the direct fire zone. Ella had keyed her radio. Phantom 2-6 on ground, 50 meters northeast of convoy, moving to contact. All elements check in. 7 voices had confirmed they were ready. Nobody was injured from the descent. Pure luck that the canopy hadn't been too thick, that the rope had reached the ground, that nobody had dropped into a ravine or river. Chen, Torres, Mitchell, with me on assault element, Williams, Foster, Webb, Castillo. Establish support position here and provide covering fire. We're hitting the insurgents from their flank. Execute. The plan was simple. Her 4-person assault element would move rapidly through the jungle to hit the main insurgent position from an unexpected direction, while the 4-person support element laid down suppressive fire to keep the insurgents' attention focused away from the flanking maneuver. Ella had started moving immediately, her M4 up and ready, navigating through thick undergrowth with practiced efficiency. Behind her, Chen, Torres, and Mitchell moved in tight formation, each covering a different sector, their movement coordinated through hundreds of hours of training. The gunfire was getting louder. Ella could see muzzle flashes through the vegetation ahead, insurgents firing from concealed positions at the convoy about 30 meters away. She'd raised her fist, the universal signal to halt. Her assault element had frozen in place, taking cover behind trees and termite mounds. Through the vegetation, Ella could see them. 6 insurgents in defensive positions behind fallen logs and large trees, firing AK-47 rifles at the convoy. They were focused entirely on the Philippine soldiers pinned down at the trucks. They had no idea a Marine Force Recon team was 20 meters behind them. Ella had signaled her team, using hand signals to assign targets. She'd pointed at herself, then at the 2 insurgents on the left. Chen got the 2 in the middle. Torres and Mitchell got the 2 on the right. Everyone had nodded understanding. Weapons came up to shoulders, sights finding targets. Ella had raised 3 fingers, 2 fingers, 1 finger. Then she'd opened fire. Her M4 had cracked rapidly, controlled bursts, 2 to 3 rounds per burst. The 2 insurgents she'd targeted had jerked and fallen before they could react. Simultaneously, Chen, Torres, and Mitchell had engaged their targets. The jungle had exploded with the sound of M4 carbines firing in rapid succession. 6 insurgents had gone down in approximately 4 seconds. The survivors, there had to be more based on the intelligence estimate of 15 to 20 total, had immediately started shouting in panic, trying to figure out where the new fire was coming from. "Moving!" Ella had shouted, already advancing toward the next position. Her team had moved with her, bounding forward in leapfrog fashion, 2 people moving while 2 provided cover, then switching. They'd reached the insurgents' former position and immediately taken cover. From here, Ella could see the convoy clearly, both trucks on the road, Philippine soldiers behind them, several bodies on the ground. The soldiers were still taking fire from at least 2 other insurgent positions deeper in the jungle. "Phantom 2-6 to Philippine element," Ella had called over the radio on the frequency they'd been given. "U.S. Marines on your north flank. We've eliminated 6 hostiles and are continuing to advance. Hold your fire to the north." A Filipino-accented voice had responded immediately, relief evident. "Copy, U.S. element. We have 3 wounded, 2 critical. Multiple hostiles still engaging from east and south positions." "Roger, stand by." Ella had assessed the tactical situation rapidly. Her 4-person assault element had hit 1 insurgent position successfully. Her support element was still in their original position providing covering fire. The convoy was still taking fire from at least 2 directions, east and south. "Support element, this is Ella. Shift fire to eastern positions. We're assaulting south." "Copy, shifting fire," Williams's voice had confirmed. Ella's assault element had started moving south, parallel to the road but staying in the jungle cover. The insurgents had scattered after losing 6 people in the initial assault. Some were withdrawing deeper into jungle. Others were stubbornly maintaining positions and continuing to fire at the convoy. Through the vegetation ahead, Ella had spotted movement. 2 insurgents repositioning, carrying AK-47s, moving between trees about 40 meters away. She'd brought her M4 up smoothly, red dot settling on the first target, squeezed the trigger. 3-round burst, the insurgent had dropped. She'd transitioned to the second target, fired again. Second insurgent down. "Contact left," Torres had shouted, engaging another target that had appeared from thick brush. The jungle combat had become chaotic. Brief engagements at close range, targets appearing and disappearing in thick vegetation, the constant crack of rifle fire mixing with the sounds of wounded screaming and radio traffic. Ella's team had continued advancing, eliminating insurgents as they encountered them. The enemy force was breaking apart, some fighting, some trying to withdraw, their coordinated ambush falling apart under the unexpected assault from U.S. Marines who'd literally dropped from the sky into their flank. After 10 minutes of sustained combat, the gunfire had started to taper off. The insurgents who were still alive had melted into the jungle, withdrawing deeper into terrain they knew intimately. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Ella had ordered. "Consolidate on the convoy. Check for wounded." Her team had moved carefully to the convoy position, weapons still ready in case of renewed contact. The Philippine soldiers had looked shocked and relieved. Most of them were young, some were wounded. All of them had thought they were about to die before the Marines appeared. Williams, Phantom 26's medic, had immediately started treating the wounded Philippine soldiers. 2 had critical injuries from gunshot wounds. Several others had less serious wounds. 3 Philippine soldiers were dead, killed in the initial ambush. Ella had done a quick assessment of her own team. Everyone was accounted for. Mitchell had taken a graze wound across his arm. Bullet had passed through his sleeve without hitting flesh. Otherwise, everyone was uninjured despite dropping through jungle canopy into an active firefight. Chen had approached her, his face showing a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. "That was the craziest insertion I've ever done. We fast-roped blind through triple canopy into a hot LZ. That should not have worked." "But it did," Ella had replied simply, "because we didn't have another option." Those soldiers needed help immediately. Not in 30 minutes after we landed in a safe LZ and patrolled through the jungle. How many did we get? At least 12 confirmed, maybe more in the jungle that we didn't see go down. The rest withdrew. The Blackhawks had returned, circling overhead now that the landing zone was secure. The second helicopter, carrying the Philippine Special Forces team, had landed on the road, and those troops had immediately established a security perimeter while casualties were loaded for evacuation. The Philippine Army lieutenant who'd been commanding the convoy had approached Ella, his uniform torn and bloodstained from treating wounded soldiers. "You saved us," he'd said simply, emotion clear in his voice. "We were finished. Out of ammunition, too many wounded. They were about to overrun our position. Then you appeared from the sky, like ghosts." "We're Marines," Ella had replied. "We don't leave friendly forces to die. You called for help, we came. But you jumped from helicopter into the jungle, into the combat. I've never seen such a thing. It's called fast roping. Special operations teams train for it. Usually we use it in urban environments or on ships. First time I've done it through triple canopy jungle into an active firefight, though. That was new." The lieutenant had looked at her M4, at her tactical gear, at the calm professional demeanor, despite having just been in sustained close-quarters combat. "You are not regular Marines," he'd said. "You are special. What is your unit?" "Force Reconnaissance. We do the missions that require small teams in difficult environments. Today's mission was extracting a friendly element from an ambush. Tomorrow might be deep reconnaissance or direct action. Whatever's needed." Over the next hour, the situation had been fully secured. The wounded were evacuated by helicopter. The dead, both Philippine soldiers and insurgents, were recovered. The convoy trucks that were still functional were driven back to base under heavy security escort. Ella's team had remained in the area, conducting a thorough search of the ambush site. They had recovered weapons from the dead insurgents, 12 AK-47 rifles, several pistols, ammunition, and communications equipment. They'd also found the command-detonated IED that had disabled the lead truck, a professionally constructed device using military-grade explosives, not the crude homemade bombs typical of less sophisticated groups. "These guys were trained," Chen had observed, examining the IED components. "This isn't farmer insurgents with old rifles. This is people with military experience and good equipment. Filipino Special Forces instructors have been warning us about this," Torres had added. "They're seeing more sophisticated tactics and better equipment in recent insurgent attacks. Somebody's training and supplying these groups with serious resources." Back at base that evening, Ella's team had debriefed with the battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel who'd been skeptical about Force Recon's capabilities when they'd first arrived, but was now looking at Ella with obvious respect. "You fast-roped through jungle canopy into an active firefight," he'd said, still processing the after-action report. "That's not in any manual I've ever read." "It's not in the manual because it's crazy," Ella had admitted. "But the tactical situation required immediate intervention. The Philippine soldiers were about to be overrun. We didn't have time for a safe insertion, so we adapted. You eliminated at least 12 insurgents, saved an entire convoy of Philippine soldiers, and protected humanitarian aid supplies from being seized. Not bad for a day's work. We got lucky, Ella had said honestly. That rope could have tangled in the canopy. Someone could have dropped into a ravine. The insurgents could have seen us descending and engaged us while we were on the rope and vulnerable. A lot of things could have gone wrong. But they didn't, because your team trains for worst-case scenarios and executes under pressure. The colonel had paused. The Philippine military is requesting your team specifically for a follow-up operation. Intelligence suggests the insurgents who escaped are part of a larger group operating from a camp about 40 kilometers north. They want to hit that camp before they can reorganize. When? 72 hours, joint operation. Your team plus a Philippine Special Forces platoon. You'd insert via helicopter to a landing zone here. He'd pointed at a map. Then patrol 5 kilometers through jungle to the suspected camp location, conduct reconnaissance, and if confirmed as hostile, conduct a raid to eliminate the leadership and destroy their supplies. Ella had studied the map. The terrain was brutal, mountainous jungle, no roads, limited helicopter landing zones. Exactly the kind of environment Force Recon trained for. "We're in," she'd said. 3 days later, Ella's 8-person team plus 24 Philippine Special Forces operators had loaded into 3 Blackhawks and lifted off from base at 0400 hours. The operation, codenamed Typhoon Strike, was a deep reconnaissance and direct action mission targeting the insurgent camp. The helicopter insertion had been smooth this time, landing in a clearing 2 kilometers from the target area, establishing security, then beginning the patrol through dense jungle in pre-dawn darkness. Ella had been on point again, navigating by GPS and terrain association, her M4 ready, night vision goggles turning the dark jungle into a green-tinted world of shadows and shapes. Behind her, the combined force moved with practiced silence, 32 operators moving through hostile terrain toward an enemy position. The patrol had taken 3 hours to cover the 5 kilometers to the target area. Slow, careful movement through difficult terrain, stopping frequently to listen and observe, avoiding any contact that might alert the insurgents. As dawn had been breaking, they'd reached the observation position overlooking the insurgent camp. Ella had gone forward with Filipino team leader Captain Reyes to conduct visual reconnaissance. The camp had been larger than expected. Through binoculars, Ella had counted at least 15 structures, bamboo huts with corrugated metal roofs, arranged in a rough cluster in a jungle clearing. Multiple armed insurgents were visible moving around the camp. Weapons racks held dozens of rifles. There was even a technical, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. "That's not a temporary camp," Reyes had whispered. "That's a permanent base. They've been here for months, maybe years." "Head count?" Ella had asked, still glassing the camp. "I count 27 individuals visible, but there's probably more in the structures. Could be 50 total, maybe more. 50 insurgents versus 32 friendly forces. Not ideal odds, but manageable if they had surprise and coordinated fire support." Ella had keyed her radio back to the helicopter support circling 10 kilometers away. "Overlord, Phantom 2-6, we have eyes on target. Confirm large insurgent camp, estimated 50 personnel, well-established position. Requesting fire support on target when we initiate contact. Phantom 2-6, Overlord copies. We have 2 Apaches on station with rockets and 30mm cannon. Give us target coordinates and we'll paint the area when you call it." Ella and Reyes had spent the next 30 minutes planning the assault. The combined force would split into 3 elements. One element would assault from the north, one from the east. The third would establish a blocking position to the south to prevent insurgents from escaping. When the assault began, the Apache helicopters would engage targets in the center of the camp with rockets and cannon fire, destroying structures and suppressing any organized resistance. At 0815 hours, all elements were in position. Ella's 8-person team was the Northern Assault Element. They'd moved within 100 meters of the camp, taking concealed positions in thick jungle overlooking the insurgent base. Through her rifle optic, Ella could see insurgents moving casually around the camp. Some were cleaning weapons, others were eating breakfast. A few were still sleeping in hammocks. None of them appeared to have any idea that 32 Special Operations Forces were surrounding their position. Ella had keyed her radio. "All elements stand by, execute, execute, execute." The jungle had erupted. The Apache helicopters had come screaming in from the south, rockets streaking down into the center of the camp. The explosions had been massive, bamboo structures disintegrating, secondary explosions as ammunition and fuel caught fire. Insurgents, caught in the open, cut down by 30mm cannon fire. Simultaneously, all 3 assault elements had opened fire from their positions around the camp perimeter. The insurgents had been caught completely by surprise. Some had tried to reach weapons, others had tried to run. All of them had been caught in a coordinated attack from 3 directions with helicopter gunships overhead. Ella had advanced with her team, her M4 firing controlled bursts at targets in the camp. An insurgent had appeared from a structure carrying an AK-47. She'd engaged him with 3 rounds center mass. He'd dropped. Another insurgent had tried to man the technical's machine gun. Mitchell had engaged him with a sustained burst from his M249 SAW before the insurgent could get the weapon into action. The assault had been overwhelming. The insurgents who survived the initial rocket attack and coordinated small arms fire had tried to organize resistance, but they were fighting trained Special Operations Forces from multiple directions with air support overhead. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Ella's element had swept through the northern section of the camp, clearing structures, securing weapons, accounting for every insurgent. Some had surrendered, others had fought and been killed. A few had tried to escape to the south and been intercepted by the blocking element. Within 12 minutes of initiating the assault, the camp had been completely secured. 23 insurgents were dead, 14 were wounded and captured, 8 had escaped into the jungle despite the blocking positions. Ella's team had taken no casualties. The Philippine forces had 2 wounded, both minor injuries from shrapnel. The intelligence haul from the camp had been significant. They'd recovered over 60 weapons, thousands of rounds of ammunition, communications equipment, documents identifying insurgent networks, and most importantly, a laptop computer containing operational plans for future attacks against civilian and military targets. As the camp had burned, deliberately set ablaze by the assault force to deny it to future insurgent use, Ella had stood at the perimeter watching the smoke rise above the jungle canopy. Chen had approached her, his M4 slung across his chest. 2 operations, 2 days, convoy rescue and camp assault. You're having a busy week. That's what we're here for. Find insurgents, eliminate them, protect civilians. The Filipinos are calling you the angel from the sky. Word spreading about the Marine who jumped from a helicopter into a firefight. You're becoming a legend in their Special Forces community. Ella had smiled slightly. I'm not an angel. I'm just a Marine who saw friendly forces in trouble and did what was necessary. Any Force Recon operator would have done the same. Maybe. But you're the one who actually did it. You made the call to fast rope into that combat zone when the pilot said it was impossible. You led the assault that saved those soldiers. That's leadership. Back at base that evening, after equipment maintenance and formal debriefs, Ella had been called to the battalion commander's office. When she'd arrived, she'd found not just the colonel, but also a brigadier general, the commanding officer of all U.S. Special Operations Forces in the Philippines. Captain Gray, the general had said. She'd been promoted from lieutenant 2 months earlier. Your operations over the past week have had significant strategic impact. The convoy rescue prevented the loss of an entire Philippine Army unit and protected critical humanitarian supplies. The camp assault eliminated a major insurgent headquarters and yielded intelligence that's already leading to follow-on operations against other insurgent networks. Thank you, sir. My team executed well. Your team executed well because you led them well. The decision to fast rope into that combat zone, that was unconventional, risky, and exactly the kind of aggressive action that wins battles. We're recommending you for a Bronze Star with V device for valor in combat. Ella had felt her stomach drop slightly. The Bronze Star was one of the highest awards for combat valor. Sir, I was just doing my job. My team did the actual fighting. Your team did the fighting because you led them into it. You made the call to insert via fast rope when conventional thinking said it couldn't be done. You led the assault that eliminated 12 insurgents and saved friendly forces. You planned and executed the camp raid that removed a major threat. That's not just doing your job. That's exceptional performance under fire. 3 months later, Ella had stood in formation at Camp Pendleton, California, while the Commandant of the Marine Corps pinned the Bronze Star with V device to her uniform. Her family had been there, her parents, her younger brother, all of them proud and slightly overwhelmed by the ceremony. But what had meant more to Ella was the presence of her team, all 8 members of Phantom 2-6 standing in the formation, all of them understanding what that medal really represented. Not individual heroics, but teamwork. The willingness to take calculated risks, the commitment to never leaving friendly forces in danger. She jumped from a helicopter into a combat zone because Philippine soldiers needed help immediately. She'd led her team through close-quarters jungle combat because that's what Marines do. She'd planned and executed a successful raid against a fortified insurgent camp because that's what Force Recon trains for. The medal was nice. The recognition was appreciated. But what mattered to Ella was simpler. When friendly forces called for help, she'd been there. When the situation demanded unconventional action, she'd adapted. When her team needed leadership, she'd provided it. That was the job. That was the standard. She'd leapt from the chopper into the combat zone. Then she'd unleashed hell on enemy forces who'd thought they were safe. That was what Marines did. That was what Force Recon was built for. And that was exactly what she'd do again the next time friendly forces needed help. Thanks for watching. Every woman has a story worth telling. Join us to hear them all.